Comprising several advanced species each with their own ruling body, the Galactic Alliance governed the universe. Strengths, but they all agreed that Earth and its people were little. The people were thought to be weak and unworthy of consideration on issues of war. The Alliance had arrived at this conclusion after tracking the history of wars on Earth and all the small-scale skirmishes. When Earth was eventually called upon to join in a galaxy-wide event, that seemed too basic for galactic standards. Defense initiative, it was more formality than required, for the leaders of the Alliance had low expectations for the planet. Their warriors most certainly could not fit the feeble and too weak genetically enhanced troops of other worlds' humans to the galactic elite. Emotional coalition ready for war against the ferocious species, the Groks, a terrible race with a reputation for ruthless destruction. The Grogs had been pushing through the galaxy, shattering everything in their path. The situation was dire, even if it came from Earth. The Alliance needed every bit of assistance. The other species' muted scorn upon Earth's announcement of involvement was based on their superior physiques and high-tech armaments, laughed at the idea of Earth's warriors fighting alongside them. Earth had been invited by the Galactic Council, a governing body of the most intelligent and powerful species. From courtesy, none thought humans could provide the aliens anything significant. Sitting in their great halls, surrounded by holographic combat images, each of them bragged about their technology and strategic brilliance. What could the humans, scarcely spacefaring, contribute? There was a condescending attitude when the first transport from Earth arrived, so the Marines left. The ship headed under a tall, broad-shouldered sergeant who seemed unaffected by the looks of derision and incredulity. Wearing their normal issue equipment without any flashy additions or technological improvements that would fit the sleek armors of looking underprepared. Their extraterrestrial equivalents to the Galactic Council appeared unworthy of notice. The Council observed intently as the Marines stood in perfect shape. No one commented, and the show humans were creating among the aliens they merely stood there seemed to disturb them. Resolute, as if they had done this 1,000 times for the Council, this was the first actual view of Earth's supposed warriors. They were not pleased by the Marines' lack of brilliant armor or improved reflexes typical of the galactic troops without superior energy weapons that the other species flaunted. Instead, carried their traditional weaponry crude by galactic norms. There was a briefing, one that seemed more of a performance than a real strategic exchange displayed by the Galactic Council. Their battle strategies stressing their advanced techniques and superior firepower. The Marines listened silently. Their looks stayed the same, not even after the alien leaders all but disregarded them in the tactical breakdown. To the Marines, this was not novel. They had been undervalued. Many times, they understood what was expected of them and lacked the need to prove anything. Not yet the case. Council described the threat. The Groks were a species that flourished on devastation. They didn't negotiate, showed no compassion, and left Ash. The Groks, reduced, surviving from every planet that had suffered them, had never ceased, and even the most advanced armies had collapsed under their overwhelming force. The Council made it. The toughest struggle the galaxy had ever had would be clearing this one. The panic in the Council members they had encountered still looked uninteresting to Marines still calm. Before them, inconceivable chances were only another task the aliens laughed at. The Marine dismissals from the briefing left them wondering how such apparently ordinary people might be so serene in the face of imminent death. To the Council, the humans were either too dumb to grasp the gravity of the aliens didn't view the Marines as equals, and they didn't expect either. Thus the scenario, or too arrogant to care either way. They were little more than a formality dispatched by Earth to show their survival through the approaching conflict. Loyalty not to finish the war. The Marines exited the Council room silent as they went back to their quarters. Their sergeant, a man of few words, only nodded to his squad. Speeches were not needed. They had their orders. That was sufficient. They had seen what they were up against, and they were not intimidated. Although they knew the Groks would be difficult, they had experienced worse than the Galactic Masters would have believed. But they did not require the permission of people who had never worked in the ground, never battled with their backs against the wall. As the Marines got ready for battle, the cosmic forces stayed sure in their supremacy. Thought their technology would be the best, the Marines lacked expensive tech and had something more. Understanding that wars weren't only about discipline training and a readiness to do whatever it required to win, they also realized one with shining weaponry was one with relentless resolve to survive the fight and iron determination. Was arriving, and the Galactic Council would shortly discover a terrible lesson. People were not weak, but rather lacked sensitivity. Pushed they may be the deadliest fighters in the galaxy, the Marines were prepared to show them precisely what Earth was to provide: the silent observation on the alien forces getting ready for the Marines. The other species were occupied calibrating their defensive shield, energy weapon testing, and modifying their advanced armor, Was a display of technological mastery something like that? Amazed every race in the galaxy except the Marines. Their weapons were basic, and they were not here to perform. Their training was cruel to them. All that mattered, their armor was effective. The assignment they had been assigned was in harder circumstances with less. They flourished as the Galactic leaders awaited deployment. Barely gave the Marines any attention. The people were simply another puzzle piece ignored. Plan mostly depended on advanced weapons and overwhelming force, neither of which the people seemed to have. The Marines understood what they were capable of, hence they didn't mind not here for recognition soon enough. So would when the moment came to send the Marines. Everyone else moved with discipline and accuracy. The alien army hurried to board their enormous transport ships, yelling commands and completing military preparations the Marines developed. Thus in silence their sergeant nodded simply, and they loaded onto their dropship. There was no need for additional training. They had done several times before. Every Marine understood their purpose and trusted their training. The battlefield was not like the simulations. It was a wilderness. The terrible advance the Earth caused by the Grok clouded the sky and burnt the ground. Ash alien ruins lay before structures, and the stink of destruction permeated the air as the GRS were relentless in their search of this. Was the first time the Marines had seen the aftermath of a Grow invasion conquest, leaving nothing alive in their wake. But that didn't faze them. Their goal was clear: hold the line. They had practiced this very scenario. Still, the alien forces were not as ordered as they landed. Some of the soldiers hesitated. Their advanced weaponry and armor suddenly felt insufficient in the face of such. Though they had expected the Groks to be a strong opponent, experiencing the devastation personally was something else. The Marines observed as completely terror started to seep into their ranks. First wave of Groks emerged on the horizon. It was obvious this would not be a simple fight. The Groks were enormous, strongly armored, and moved with terrible speed. Their weapons, cruel and crude, were designed for maximum destruction. The alien troops instantly adopted defense posture, releasing their energy, while the Marines stayed cool and had no advanced firepower, shields, and getting ready to unleash it as the war started. Shields, no advanced targeting devices, simply their guns and the confidence they had in each other. It became clear that the extraterrestrial troops differed from the Marines. Even with their advanced technology, battled to fit the disorderly battlefield. Their weapons were strong, yet slow to charge and hard to move in the fast-changing surroundings. Their reliance on technology made them rigid. And when plans did not go as intended, panic struck the Marines but cooked in the. While the alien forces stayed to their pre-planned formations, the Marines moved with fluidity and accuracy. Chaos changed their strategy on the fly, using every piece of cover and tactical opening their guns presented. Though basic were highly precise in their hands and their bullets had catastrophic impact, the Groks were, though, relentless. The Marines also lacked retreat and moved as one covering. Not long before the alien forces started to falter, each other's flanks and relentless efficiency drove ahead. Their seemingly amazing rive in simulations was showing less efficiency in the heat of technology. Their strong energy barriers left the warriors vulnerable. Once they ran out, their weapons were left naked. While sluggish to replenish and challenging to target in the turmoil the Marines experienced, capable of great destruction, exact and effective, they lacked advanced targeting systems with shields. However, every shot counted and every action was deliberate. They did not need them. They were carrying out a mission while the conflict raged on. The Marines discovered not only battling something. Torn off from the rest of the alien forces, the Groks had left the Marines abandoned with an ambush. Outnumbered and cornered to any other force, this would have been a death sentence. The Marines did not panic. They reassembled with great precision, having been schooled for this very eventuality and acting strictly defensively. Their weapons never ceased blazing, and every shot landed in its mark. The Grus, with all their numbers and overwhelming force, couldn't crack the Marines' line. The people battled with a degree of discipline and will not seen before the GRS had experienced. Marines depended on their training instincts and each other rather than technology or brute force. Though they battled hard every inch of land they acquired, they gradually but definitely started to push the Groks back. They never ceased advancing. By the time the alien troops understood what was happening, it was too late, since the Marines outnumbered, and he had not only survived the ambush but had changed the course of the war for the alien leaders under direction. Ridden the humans off as ire, they were now obliged to observe with incredulity as the Marines maintained their position and pushed. Though the war was far from finished, one thing was clear. The humans were not to be undervalued. The Marines had demonstrated that they could win without sophisticated technology or superior firepower. All they required was their discipline's instruction. The Galactic Council had questioned their unflinching will. But the Marines were demonstrating that the fighters from Earth were far more powerful than anyone had thought the case. Although ambush had left the Marines in a difficult situation, it was not anything they had not encountered prior to their training starting. Right away, letting them remain concentrated and carry out their plan with calm accuracy. The Marines stayed low, selected their targets, and returned while the alien soldiers fretted and sought refuge. They knew the Groks outnumbered them, but their will had been stoked by fire with lethal accuracy. In tougher circumstances, and survived this was just another day on the field for them, the GRS, for all their weight and power, did not anticipate the Marines to fight back with the same ferocity. They were accustomed to completely destroying their adversaries with alone numbers and sheer power. But the Marines were not intimidated. The humans moved like a well-oiled machine. Relentless. But so were the Marines every time. The Groks were coordinated and effective. Pressed forward, the Marines held their ground, refusing to let their rifles cease firing. Every inch there never stopped fire. Shot hit his mark. The extraterrestrial forces, despite their amazing technology, started soon. Their energy shields couldn't hold pulled up to the continuous attack. They started to fall beneath the weight. The Marines, on the other hand, did not depend on shields or fancy tech. The men behind them were exposed. They depended on their instincts and their capacity to adjust to any environment they understood how to make sense of. Their training, most of what they possessed, was sufficient to keep them alive as the fighting carried on. The Marines began to observe flaws in the Grok strategies. The GRS mostly depended on their size and strength, storming forward in great force. Attacks, but their motions were predictable and they were slow. The Marines, using their agility and speed to outmaneuver the Groks, they hit quickly and forcefully out of important objectives and upsetting the enemy's formation. The Groks lacked knowledge on how to react. They had never faced an enemy like the Marines before. An enemy the alien could match in ferocity and outthink them at every move. Surprised commanders, observing from a distance, expected the humans to be overwhelmed. The Marines were turning the Groks from a slight diversion into nothing more than a small annoyance. With all their advanced weaponry and technology, the other alien species were fighting against a tide of war, and where the Marines were flourishing in the anarchy that defied logical thinking for the superiors. The answer could be how a civilization as primitive as humans could be holding their own against the most hated enemy in the galaxy. Was basic. The Marines were depending on something considerably more than technology or brute force. Strong there will be to survive. Their refusal to back down has been taught to enable quick thinking, and to never give up no matter the circumstances. That is exactly what they were doing. The Marines plucked them one by one, gently but definitely, while the Groks pushed forward with overwhelming numbers, turning the fight in their advantage. Even as the Groks pressed harder, the Marines advanced with intent. Every move performed was unquestionably focused and deliberate. Their fix unbreakable. The GRS, for all their might, is beginning to fall back. Not only were the Marine strategies effective, but their sheer will was shattering. The Marines prevailed using intimidation and overwhelming force, using enemy spirit. The GRS, but they refused to be intimidated. The conflict peaked when the Marine, against all odds man, pushed the originally cut, isolated from the rest of the galactic armies for hours, Groks back far enough to reorganize. Were positioned to link the extraterrestrial forces, observing the Marine success back up. Were empowered and began to advance. It was a turning point in the fight, what had once seemed like. Now, a certain loss seemed like a potential triumph, all because the Marines had resisted to yield, and the galactic commanders who had ridden off the humans as negligible had to reassess what they knew. The Marines from Earth had shown that they were something other than just another species to be discounted. Their tenacity, adaptability, and determination to give up had altered the path of the conflict totally. As the Marines reassembled, commanders started to realize that people were not to be undervalued. Though they were focused on the goal, knowing the combat was far from perfect, there was no celebration or sense of victory. From over they had progressed. But the conflict was not finished. The Groks remained out there, and the first time since the fight started, the galactic troops had hope, and it wasn't due of their numbers or technology either. The humans, the Marines, had showed them what it was to fight, to truly fight, and that made all the difference. The GRS, who had been so certain of their victory, now were defensive. Not through anything, the Marines had kept their ground and drove the enemy back, doing something none thought possible. Excellent firepower or advanced technology, it was through simple discipline and the type of resolve that only humanity observed, to have the galactic leaders watching from far away. At last understood that the fighters of Earth were considerably more powerful than they had ever thought. The struggle, one thing was very evident: the Marines had earned the galaxy's respect, and they had demonstrated that humanity weren't soft, rather. They were among the hardest. Most of them were feeble in truth. Resolved warriors in the galaxy, the GRS had undervaluated them and now they were paying the cost. The Galactic leaders, who had earlier discounted Earth's contribution as meaningless, now known the truth. The Marines were not simply battling. They were battling to show that humanity belonged in the galaxy if survival meant proving this. They were winning. The GRS had understated their opponent, and now they felt that the Marines had shown them, while consequences they had always depended on overwhelming force to destroy their opponents. Something distinct: the humans did not break under pressure, rather, the fact that they were outnumbered actually caused them to not fall. As the fight stretched on, Marines seemed to get stronger. There will never wavers the GRS for all their force. Strength was unable to defeat them. This was a war they had not expected, a battle of will. Not only weapons, the knowing the enemy's tactics now. Marines had discovered a rhythm in the anarchy they knew. How the Groks moved and assaulted, each Marine functioning with intent, leveraging the shortcomings of the Grok scale to generate force. But it also made them slow. The Marines exploited that against them, darting in and out of cover, firing exact bullets that whittled away at the enemy's armor and morale. The GRS, who had been so assured at the start of the battle, were now being driven back by an alien they had formerly written off as inferior. Their advance stopped stunned. They had never seen anything like this. Commanders observing from distance were not merely surviving, they were winning, and they were doing it devoid of the sophisticated technology used by the rest of the universe. Forces depending on the Marines used only their guns. Their grit and their unquestionable discipline was a degree of ability and will that the other species simply couldn't, though the Marines were proving them incorrect. They had always thought that technology was the secret to victory. Every movement the Marines made was deliberate. They pushed ahead and started to occupy strategic points on the ground. Every advanced strategic. They did not overextend themselves. They did not rush either. Battled with a degree of accuracy and patience that left the Groks annoyed and disordered. The Marines were carrying out a strategy they had developed, rather than merely trying to survive what had seemed like from an unworkable scenario into a well-under-control struggle currently turning in their favor, the Grus for all. Their might was not fit for this type of battle. They were accustomed to ruling their opponent by overwhelming them with sheer power and numbers, while the Marines followed different guidelines. They stood their ground around, adjusted to the new circumstances instead of becoming terrified. And gradually but definitely changed the fight against the Groks from who had the highest firepower to could stay the longest, outsmart and outfight their adversary. And in this situation, the Marines were demonstrating their be significantly more powerful than the GRS had projected. The cosmic powers, seeing the Marine triumph, started to rally, and from panic there was hope. The Marines had showed them that although the Groks weren't invincible, other creatures inspired by them could find success. The people's resiliency began to drive ahead. It was a total turnaround from the last conflict. Once dismissed and undervalued, Marines were now spearheading the GRS, and those who had looked unstoppable were now on defense. The Marines did not stop. They understood the Groks were still threatening but could not afford to let them change the tide, since given the chance. But the Marines pressed the advantage, moving carefully through, not about to offer them the chance. The battlefield, eliminating GRS wherever they could, marking the first time, were withdrawing. It was a scene none had anticipated. Seeing the galaxies being pushed back by a group of people who had been written off as most hated enemy was a threat. Little the alien commanders, seeing the conflict, could possibly believe. What had begun as a frantic effort to keep the line had evolved into something. The Marines had changed everything. Complete counterattack, and it was all due to the bravery of the Marines. Their discipline and resolve to give up had motivated the whole galactic force the extraterrestrial commanders had once possessed. Looked down on the people who were now seeing them in a much different perspective. These were not only soldiers, these were fighters in the most accurate sense. Hence the battle was not done, but the momentum had changed. The Marines had proved that they were more than competent of holding their own against the Groks. They had done what none else in the galaxy had been able to recover, not using superior firepower, yet with superior will, and that had made all the difference. For the Groks, for the first time, were on the losing side of a fight. The Marines realized they couldn't let up. They had acquired the upper hand, but they had to retain it. Every stride forward was difficultly fought, every determined and cooperative. The Groks were not descending without a struggle. The Marines were winning inch of land, were prepared for whatever came next, and had shown their value to the Galactic Council as well as to themselves. Had proved that they were every bit as strong and competent as any other force on this battlefield. The galaxy, as the fighting on the Marines persisted, they kept advancing. Their objective was not for praise, they needed not recognition. And they were paying the cost now, having completed it regardless of what the GRS had understated. The Marines had showed the galaxy that humanity was not to be discounted. They were not weak, rather, they were fighters. Though the fight was far from finished, the Marines had turned the tide what had seemed like inevitability. The Groks were withdrawing, and loss was now a hard-fought triumph in progress. The Galactic forces were gathering behind the humanity the Marines had acquired their spot on the battlefield, and the galaxy would never undervalue them once they had exhibited the might of Earth's warriors, something no one else could have. Would ignore as the Marines continued one thing the Groks were clearly know: the longer the unstoppable force they had once seemed, the more it was due to the Marines' discipline. Though the war might not be done, the Marines had already triumphed with their spirit and tenacity. Something considerably more vital than a combat they had won the regard of the galaxy. The fight had turned entirely in favor of the Galactic armies, but it was obvious to everyone who had made the difference the Marines, once considered as a small element in the overall strategy, had become the key to victory. Since the Grogs kept withdrawing, it was clear that the humans had broken the gross spirit, something not done by any other species. Commanders marveled as the Marines led the charge with their relentless drive, guiding the once dominant adversary more and farther behind. The Marines never stopped moving forward. There was no grand celebration, no time with the same discipline and accuracy they had displayed during the combat of triumph for them. This was simply the work. They were not battling for glory or knowing their place and knowing what they were trained to perform. Each Marine understood their fight, and they carried it flawlessly, while other species might have been tempted to stop and savor the Marines' triumph. Stayed concentrated, the Groks were still hazardous, hence a threat, and the Marines weren't about to let their guard down until the Groks had a real victory. Carefully, seemingly unstoppable, those who had been coordinating their attacks were now struggling to survive their carefully planned assaults had turned into. While the Marines were methodical, desperate attempts to retain their position that drove the Groks back inch by inch, never allowing the enemy a chance to regroup. There was no haste, no overextension, just a relentless advance that left the Groks none choice but a retreat. The war had changed what had once been a horror scenario into a controlled and forceful victory for the humans. Near its end, the Galactic Council started to see how erroneous they had been regarding the Marines of Earth. Had not only shown themselves but also transformed the galaxy's perspective on humanity. The Council had originally rejected, though, now they saw them for what they really were: one of the hardest, most resilient. The people were still weak and useless species in the galaxy. The Marines had proved that superior numbers or superior technology did not define strength. It comes from within, from the relentless resolve to endure, to battle, to win. Where there had once been, the alien forces, now totally united behind the Marines, rushed forward with fresh vitality. Now the trust the Marines had given them had showed them that the Groks weren't invincible. The alien fighters, motivated by the human model, battled harder than they had ever experienced, and as they drove the Groks back, the Marines stayed at the front, guiding the charge with the same cool resolve that had seen them through the whole conflict. The last hours of the fighting were a swirl of controlled chaos. The GRS, recognizing they had lost, tried one last desperate stand. The Marines were ready. They had faced more difficult circumstances before, and the Marines planned their last attack. They were not about to allow the enemy to reclaim any territory. Precision cutting across the grow lawns and entirely destroying their formation altogether. The GRS, now fully defeated, had no decision but to withdraw completely, handing the victorious Galactic forces control of the battlefield. Dust settled, and the echoes of war vanished. The Marines stood erect with their still-in-hand guns, absent from need. Say anything, their deeds had said louder than words ever could have accomplished. What the Galactic Council had done, had thought it impossible, they had not only survived but had won. The Groks, once the same species the Council had previously ridden off, had driven back the most hated adversary in the galaxy. Not very important, the alien commanders, still reviewing the battle events, approached the Marine sergeant with it. After witnessing what the humans were capable of, their newly acquired respect impacted everything the Marines could accomplish. They were not only warriors, their strength derived from advanced techniques or technology, not from any one item. It resulted from their pure will to overcome their rejection, to stand no matter the circumstances. The alien leaders who had once slid down on the humans, currently in wonder of the Galactic Council, once, because of the efforts made by Earth, now saw the people as equals. The Marines had shown that they were not to be discounted. Rather, they had evolved into the very emblem of the Alliance's strength, the other species possessing all advanced technologies and weaponry. True power, it was proven, came from the heart, from the will to do, not from equipment. Whatever it needed to guard one's own. The Marines, for their part, they did not pursue accolades or appreciation. Their work was nothing more than their mission, devoid of decorations or honors. Had been straightforward from the beginning: battle, survive, and win. That is exactly what they had done. They have shown the galaxy what it meant to be human. What it was to have the kind of strength unable of judged by technology or power. The Marines had demonstrated that real warriors lacked sophisticated weaponry or advanced armor. They merely needed each other as the battlefield calmed and the surviving forces gathered one thing. The galaxy would never look at Earth the same way. The Marines had altered. Everything they had shown indicated that humanity was not only capable but also very necessary for the future of the galaxy. GRS had undervalued them, and now they were in full retreat, nursing their wounds and understanding that Earth's fighters were up. Although the combat was finished, the Marines knew more battles were to come they did not know. Focus on their victory instead. They were ready for whatever was ahead. Because that's what Marines battled. They survived and claimed the galaxy had discovered a useful lesson that day. Humans were warriors in every sense of the word, not merely another species. And from that day on, Earth's Marines would be regarded as the ones who had changed the course of the war, not with sophisticated technology or superior numbers, but with the kind of strength only found inside.